Human beings are currently wired into the largest information networks in history. But as connectivity has expanded, so has a profound sense of psychological distress. When we log on, we immediately begin measuring ourselves against others. Psychologists found that up to 12% of daily human thoughts are consumed by social comparison. A recent meta-analysis in Frontiers in Psychology aggregated data from over 36,000 participants, calculating a definitive correlation coefficient of 0.330. This figure directly links comparing ourselves to idealized online profiles with severe psychological maladjustment, manifesting as anxiety, depression, and lower well-being. When professionals discuss this phenomenon, it is often framed as vanity or a modern character flaw. The assumption is that we compare ourselves because we lack confidence. The clinical data reveals the exact opposite. Social comparison is a hardwired evolutionary survival mechanism. It is a biological program that has been completely hijacked by the algorithmic curation of modern digital environments. To solve the epidemic of digital distress, we cannot simply tell people to stop comparing themselves. We must understand the neurobiological hardware that makes tracking our social status a mandatory requirement for human survival. For the vast majority of human history, survival depended on successful integration into small tribal networks of roughly 150 people. In 1954, psychologist Leon Festinger outlined social comparison theory. He observed that when humans lack clear, objective benchmarks for their behavior, they look to the people around them to evaluate their own traits and abilities. In ancestral environments, accurately judging your place in the local dominance hierarchy determined your physical security. High-ranking individuals gained preferential access to limited food and protection. We see this deeply conserved behavior across other primate species. These animals continuously monitor nonverbal status cues to maintain cooperative group structures and distribute resources without resorting to physical conflict. Knowing your place in the hierarchy allowed early humans to conform to group norms, avoid costly conflicts with dominant members, and secure mating opportunities. Monitoring status kept you alive. Historically, these comparisons were highly localized. You evaluated yourself against a few dozen peers. The data was infrequent, and it was based on the unedited reality of daily survival. Today, you evaluate yourself against a global network of millions. You are exposed to a highly curated, algorithmically amplified stream of unattainable highlight reels. The human brain is operating an ancient software program designed to navigate a small local tribe. When it is fed an infinite stream of idealized global data, the status monitoring system overloads. We can trace this overload to a specific neural circuit deep within the brain that navigates social hierarchies. When you observe a status cue, like seeing a peer announce a major promotion, that visual information enters the cortex and splits into two distinct neurochemical pathways. The first is the reward pathway. The striatum tracks your perceived rank. When your status is validated or elevated, it dispenses dopamine, creating a brief surge of satisfaction. The second is the threat pathway. If you perceive a drop in your social standing, your amygdala treats that deficit as a literal threat to your survival, triggering a fight or flight stress response. The amygdala evolved to detect physical predators. It cannot distinguish between a physical threat in the wild and a curated career update on LinkedIn. This misinterpretation floods your body with stress hormones. It raises your heart rate and initiates spiraling thoughts, while you sit perfectly safe behind a screen. Social media platforms weaponize this exact circuitry. They offer brief dopamine hits through likes to maintain engagement, while constantly threatening your status through upward comparisons with other users. The anxiety you feel when scrolling is an involuntary neurochemical threat response. Your biological alarm system is functioning exactly as evolution intended. While the neurobiological hardware is universal across the human species, the software that determines what constitutes a status threat is heavily modulated by cultural background. This diagram illustrates how individualist cultures construct self-worth. Status is determined by personal achievement, autonomy, and self-reliance. In this framework, seeing a peer succeed registers as an upward comparison. Because status is zero-sum and highly individualized, that success is processed as a direct, unmitigated threat to your own unique competence. Collectivist cultures operate on a different model. Here, status is heavily derived from group affiliation, familial ties, and social harmony. This interdependent structure provides a buffering effect. In collectivist frameworks, a peer's success can be appraised as reinforcing the prestige of the entire group, which dampens the individual psychological threat. Regardless of cultural orientation, globalization and digital platforms are increasingly forcing users worldwide to compete on highly visible, individualistic metrics like follower counts and curated achievements. Our threat appraisal is a learned framework, not an objective truth. Understanding our cultural programming allows us to recognize why certain comparisons trigger us so deeply. Psychologists use social self-preservation theory to explain why different types of mental distress emerge at different times following a digital comparison. The first stage is the proximal response. These are the immediate, acute emotional alarms that sound the exact moment you perceive an idealized post. Looking back at the meta-analysis data, we see that specific social evaluative emotions, like envy and body dissatisfaction, show the highest correlation to upward comparison, with an effect size of 0.438. Experiencing benign envy can serve as a functional, motivating alarm that pushes you to improve, but the digital environment rarely offers an achievable path to resolution. Because digital seeds provide an endless stream of unresolvable, idealized threats, those acute proximal alarms never shut off. This leads to the distal response. When the social self-preservation system is chronically activated, it begins to inflict long-term systemic damage. Over time, the acute alarm degrades into generalized clinical symptoms. The data shows clear descending correlations for sustained anxiety and eventually clinical depression. The prolonged elevation of cortisol from constant status threats physically impairs cognitive functioning. It weakens the immune system and steadily erodes your baseline self-esteem. Users become locked in a closed loop. The striatum craves digital validation, prompting you to check your feed, which then continually triggers the amygdala's threat response. Digital depression does not happen instantly. It is the predictable, mechanical breakdown of an evolutionary alarm system that is being worked to death. We cannot rewire millions of years of evolutionary biology. The solution is not to eliminate comparison entirely, but to change how we process the alarm. Clinical psychologists employ a technique known as cognitive diffusion, a core mechanism in acceptance and commitment therapy. Cognitive diffusion trains individuals to observe their own comparison thoughts and feelings of envy as raw biological data. They are alerts generated by an ancient system, not objective truths about your self-worth. This cognitive shift pairs with behavioral interventions, like the consumption audit. This involves the strategic, intentional unfollowing of curated accounts that consistently trigger your amygdala's upward comparison threat response. Curating a feed is not a matter of avoiding reality. It is a necessary step to protect your brain's status monitoring system from unnecessary manufactured triggers. You can also satisfy the brain's evaluation drive by shifting from interpersonal comparison, measuring yourself against others, to temporal comparison, where you measure your current self against your past self. We are ancient biological machines, attempting to navigate a hyper-connected digital world that is built to exploit our deepest survival instincts. By understanding the neurobiology of status, you can stop viewing digital anxiety as a personal failure. It is an environmental mismatch, and you have the power to filter, diffuse, and control it.